Debt doomsdayers claim we must raise the debt ceiling, otherwise an economic catastrophe will ensue. But my next guest argues we can service the debt without more borrowing. Finally, some fiscal sanity coming from Washington. Joining me now, Republican Pennsylvania Senator Pat Toomey. Senator Toomey, it's a pleasure. Welcome back to Freedom.
Hey, Judge. Thanks for having me.
Before we get to the debt, just a quick question, if I could. Your attitude, your feeling on Egypt. I mean, it's crumbling apart before our very eyes. Should the United States government be trying to affect the outcome of the change in the government in Egypt, or is this an Egyptian problem for the Egyptians to resolve without any outside influence from us? What's your take, Senator?
I think it's very much the latter, Judge. Our ability to determine the outcome is very, very limited or non-existent, and it's not what we believe in. So I don't think we should try to dictate the outcome. The Egyptian people need to make this decision. I hope if they do move in a more democratic direction, which I hope they will, I hope they'll choose wisely. There are some unattractive choices that may be looming, but I don't think we can control the outcome.
Got it. Senator, the Secretary of the Treasury and people on his behalf have attempted to persuade the Congress that if we don't let him borrow another $1.5 trillion, the American government will go into default. It will not be able to pay the debt service to people who have loaned the government money. You wrote a tremendous article in the Wall Street Journal not too long ago debunking Secretary Geithner's theory. Could you explain to us how we can pay the debt service, be fiscally responsible, not raise taxes, and not borrow more money?
Well, actually, I think that we're probably going to have to borrow more money at some point, but my point is that the most irresponsible thing we could do is just raise the debt ceiling without doing anything about cutting spending and getting process reform so that we don't keep finding ourselves in an ever deeper hole. So I looked at the simple facts, Judge, as you probably know. Only about 6% at the moment, about 6% of everything the government intends to spend next year is needed for debt service. Right. And 70% of everything the government plans to spend is going to come in the form of tax revenue. So there's no way in the world we're going to default on our debt. It'd be crazy for us to default on our debt. We shouldn't do it. And when I started to hear some suggesting that failure to immediately raise the debt ceiling is equivalent to a default on our debt, I said, you know, we really need to set that record straight. So I've introduced a simple bill that says, in the event that we don't raise the debt ceiling, the Treasury's first priority will be to honor our obligations on our debt. Don't default on the millions of Americans who are holding treasuries in their 401ks, in their IRAs, the pension funds that are holding treasuries. We should never default on our debt. I just want to take that off the table.
Can you and Senator Jim DeMint and Senator Rand Paul and Congressman Ron Paul and those who feel similarly persuade your fellow Republicans and maybe a few Democrats that at some point we just have to stop the borrowing, that we can't just keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing because it just can't last?
We've been having a series of discussions about just how critical this deficit hole we've dug, as you probably know. We're running a deficit this year alone that's about 10% of our total economic output. The debt that we owe to those who've lent us money is approaching 70% of all of our economic output. This is a totally unsustainable path, and I think the vast majority of my Republican colleagues understand that. And I hope and I believe that more and more Democrats are also going to be reaching this same conclusion. At least I hope they will, because we've got to do something about it now. We can't kick this can down the road anymore.
Last question. Can Obamacare be repealed?
Well, it needs to be repealed. The question is when. We're going to have a vote in actually just a few minutes, and I'm going to vote to repeal it. And I'm going to keep pushing for this. Now, I understand President Obama wouldn't be signing a repeal bill if we could get it to him.
Right.
But it's important that we lay the predicate and we start the process, because this bill is really very, very bad for our economy and it's bad for health care.
Senator Toomey, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Freedom Watch.
Thanks for having me.